What is up, YouTube friends? This is AmKay at Purple Sky 11, and I am back with part 20 of my Benoit series. And today we are going to take a look at the summary of findings that Sports Legacy Institute provided regarding the study of Benoit's brain. And it wouldn't be a YouTube video if I didn't say please don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And while you're down there, be sure to hit that little bell so you receive notifications for future videos. And please share this with anyone you think might be interested. You can also find a link to my Cash App in the description box. If you like what you see, enjoy the content, and would like to make a contribution to the channel, any amount would be greatly appreciated. Even $1 goes a long way. To everyone who's been helping out, thank you so much. Your donations are making it possible for me to expand storage space for documents and files, and I'm working on creating a website where you'll be able to access and hopefully download all of the documents that I have, including all links and resources from all the Benoit videos. I work on this project in some shape or form every day, either recording, editing, researching, or writing. Even when I'm not physically working on it, it is always on my mind, drafting ideas in my head and stuff. I don't have a job other than this channel, and I'm really enjoying doing this. I'm hoping to get things organized and consistent enough that I can make this my main job, maybe, because research is really what I love to do. I have about 5 videos recorded trying to get everything documented in case more articles are sucked into the 404 void. And with all of this stuff going on right now within the WWE and with VKM, I just don't know. And I do have some very interesting videos coming about the 2007 steroid scandal and the Signature Pharmacy lawsuit. And I'm really excited to get these videos out to you. But that's enough of the business part of things. So with all of that out of the way, let's get into this video. Okay, here we go. We're going to get into the Sports Legacy Institute information part of these police documents. So here we are, Sports Legacy Institute, which as of September 3rd, 2015, is now known as the Concussion Legacy Foundation. This is the section of these police documents that contains the summary of findings from the Sports Legacy Institute about the CTE. And in the previous video, when I went over the police findings, their conclusions based on this Sports Legacy information, this is the packet of information that they referred to, that after reviewing this packet of information, they had concluded that CTE offered no explanation as to what had happened with this crime. So we're going to go through this now. And then in another video, we're going to talk more about this establishment here, this Sports Legacy Institute or Concussion Legacy Foundation, and the people involved with that, sort of similar to what we did with Dr. Sperry and Dr. Aston. So we're going to take a look at these people and see what kind of connections they have with the WWE and whether or not they're, reliable as far as not having any outside interests or ulterior motives in this. So we're going to start here and take a look at the summary of findings. It says CB, and CB would be Chris Benoit. So CB's brain was processed and examined microscopically using a battery of standard histochemical and specialized immunochemistry stains. And that means they took cross-section histological samples of Benoit's brain that looked something like this, put it on slides, and then they looked at it microscopically. It says specifically techniques were utilized to identify tau protein. Tau becomes phosphorylated and visible when the person has had prior traumatic brain injury, irrespective if there were clinical expressions or identification that a concussion had occurred. So what that means is that it doesn't matter whether there was an actual clinical diagnosis of a concussion or a brain injury or not. These tau protein tangles, they can be identified in somebody's brain even if that person has no medical documentation of actually having a traumatic brain injury. So isn't that kind of convenient? You don't even need to have had some clinical diagnosis of a traumatic brain injury, and you could still have these tau proteins. That's shady. It says large amounts of abnormal tau proteins in the form of neurofibrillary tangles, or NFTs, and neuritic threads were found, along with loss of nerve cells, or neurons. These extensive changes throughout CB's brain, identified in the neocortex, basal ganglia, substantia nigra, and the brainstem, consisted of accumulation of tau protein in the neurons and their fibers, which project to other parts of the brain. We believe that these are most likely post-traumatic expressions of prior recognized or unrecognized subclinical concussions. So again, they're saying that they recognize these things in Benoit's brain, and that this Sports Legacy Institute, they believe, says right here, we believe that these are most likely post-traumatic expressions of prior recognized or unrecognized concussions. So that's the summary of their findings. Basically, they just say, hey, we identified these tangles in his brain, and yep, they're there. And it's most likely due to previous brain injury, whether or not it had been clinically recognized. That's their summary. And yes, I do understand that we know Benoit had previous concussion trauma to his brain. I'm not discounting that. Then it goes on, we have this piece down here. Now, it's important to note that this part of it, this was a press release for immediate release. This was a press release. So when Sports Legacy Institute came to their conclusions, they released it to the press at the same time that they released it to the police. So it's not like this place, this institute, was working for the police when doing this. They had their own interests in mind here. Please keep all of that in mind, because we're going to really dig into this in some upcoming videos. But this goes on to say, for more information, who to contact. And the headline here, Sports Legacy Institute announces findings of forensic examinations on wrestler Chris Benoit's brain. So they put this out for the press. Neuropathological tests find evidence of chronic traumatic encephalopathy consistent with numerous brain injuries. So let's see what this press release says here. New York, September 5th, 2007. Leading medical experts associated with the Sports Legacy Institute today appeared with Michael Benoit, father of professional wrestler Chris Benoit, to release the results of neuropathological tests that demonstrate his son suffered from a type of brain damage called chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, which was found in all regions of his brain. The Sports Legacy Institute, or SLI, which oversaw and coordinated the testing, is an independent medical research organization. Haha, see, so it's a private company with its own private interests existing on the fringes of government and justice system and law enforcement. But don't worry, it says right here that they're dedicated to studying the long-term effects of head injuries in sports. SLI President Christopher Nowinski. And oh my God, just wait until we get to talking about this guy, Christopher Nowinski. You think Benoit's brain was messed up. Holy crap. So Chris Nowinski contacted Michael Benoit on June 28th, the Thursday after his son's death, to obtain permission to study the wrestler's brain. Swooping in while he's still emotionally grief-stricken and while the media is screaming murder-suicide, am I right? Because the father's just going to want answers any way he can find it. And Chris Nowinski is here to make sure he gets those answers. Think about this sentence here. Think about this. SLI President Christopher Nowinski contacted Michael Benoit on June 28th, the Thursday after his son's death, to obtain permission to study the wrestler's brain. So it wasn't even police who requested this SLI, Sports Legacy Institute, to study the brain. This dude, Christopher Nowinski, contacted Benoit's father directly, says it right here, on June 28th, 3 days after Michael Benoit had been notified of what had happened with his son and his son's family, and asks if, can we have his brain so we can look at it? Imagine, put yourself in the shoes of Michael Benoit. You want an explanation, don't you, for what your son has just done? You want an explanation, any explanation other than your son did this because he did this. You want a reason, right? Was it ethical for this Christopher Nowinski to contact Benoit's father 3 days after the death to ask permission for this? What do you think? Let me know. I'm interested to know what you think. And we're going to talk some more about this Christopher Nowinski too. Find out what kind of guy he is and where did he get this idea to come up with this Sports Legacy Institute. You think Benoit was out of his mind? Wait until you hear about this guy. What I can tell you right now is that Christopher Nowinski is a former employee of the WWE. Yep, he was a professional wrestler. Here he is as Mr. Harvard. I mean, check it out. Here he is with Bischoff and Taker, Goldust, and what do you know? The guy's even featured in a few video games. Imagine that. And what do you know? Triple H elected to the board of directors of Sports Legacy Institute? But I'm sure there's nothing more to see here. Thick as thieves. I mean, are you figuring this out yet? So you can make of that what you will. In the meantime, let's keep reading here. Sports Legacy Institute, or SLI's, research has indicated there is a connection between the repeated head injuries suffered by many athletes involved in contact sports and an aggregation of abnormal tau proteins in the brain, causing CTE. CTE's most common symptoms include depression, cognitive impairment, dementia, Parkinsonism, and erratic behavior. Parkinsonism would mean they would have had symptoms of Parkinson's disease, like tremors or shakiness in your hands and in other parts of your body. Uncontrollable tremors. The only way they could have been controlled would have been with medication. And that's something that's very difficult to hide. So does anyone know if Benoit had any noticeable tremors? You know, like his hands shaking or anything? Experts believe that CTE may have been a cause or contributing factor in the Benoit tragedy. A cause or a contributing factor. And that's what I'm saying. It couldn't have been the CTE alone, because other professional athletes have been diagnosed with CTE posthumously or post-mortem if they've donated their brain, because that's the only way you can find this out for sure is by looking at the brain. So others have been diagnosed with CTE, but they didn't necessarily have any symptoms while they were still alive. No behavioral problems that were noticed or anything like that. So there has to be another factor if you want to look at the CTE as a cause or reason for this crime. I can't argue with that. It was there. Those tau proteins, those tangles, they're there. They were in his brain. But just because a correlation exists, all that technically means is that more research is needed. Correlation does not equal causation or cause and effect. It merely indicates a possible relationship between two or more variables. And I'll talk more about that a bit later in this video. And I'm also working on a video where I show you exactly what that means in more detail and how easy it is to manipulate data. But there has to be another contributing factor that made Benoit and these other athletes snap. And it's something that didn't affect the other athletes who have been diagnosed by CTE because it didn't cause them to have these extreme behavioral changes. That's all I'm saying. While CTE has long been found in boxers and more recently in NFL football players, the findings of CTE in Benoit suggest that athletes involved in other contact sports may also be at a heightened risk for this type of brain injury. Quote, "When Chris Nowinski contacted me about conducting tests on Chris's brain, I was extremely hesitant given the circumstances surrounding my son's death," said Michael Benoit. "I agreed to the testing after he explained their desire to expand knowledge about the potential brain damage that athletes can suffer from repetitive head injuries in contact sports. When the results were explained to me by the SLI doctors, I was shocked to learn the extent of damage and saddened that he could have been suffering from this without anyone's knowledge." Oh my God, so that's what gets me. Without anyone's knowledge. No signs, no cues. Considering that list of symptoms, I'm not sure that's even possible. People would have noticed. And I don't mean in hindsight, but in the moment. People would have been asking, "Hey man, are you okay?" Instead, everyone says they never saw this coming. This quote goes on to say, "I hope the examination of Chris's brain leads to greater understanding and ultimately helps protect athletes of all ages." End quote. And yeah, wouldn't that be wonderful? As a father whose son did something very horrible, it would be a positive thing to his legacy, right? That at least an explanation exists other than that he was just a piece of shit murderer. You see, a diagnosis of CTE would mean that Benoit didn't know what he was doing, which would mean he probably didn't maliciously intend to hurt anyone. And if that's what happened, and he came back to reality and understood what he had done, I have to say his actions at that point do make sense. But guys, if that's what actually happened, that's a freaking tragedy, not a crime, because then they were all victims. But still, nobody looks at it that way. Oh, Benoit's still just a piece of shit no matter what anyone says, right? This goes on to say, Bennett Omalu, MD, MPH, a leading forensic neuropathologist, the chief medical examiner of San Joaquin County, California, and founding member of the Sports Legacy Institute. Chief medical examiner. We know how completely devoid of corruption that position can be, right? Of course, I'm being sarcastic. Just watch my videos about Dr. Sperry, who was at the time the chief medical examiner at the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, and you'll see exactly what I mean. So this guy's a founding member of the Sports Legacy Institute. He examined Benoit's brain as part of the Sports Legacy Project, and had also examined the brains of Mike Webster, Terry Long, Andre Waters, and Justin Strzelczyk, all of whom were professional football players, died by the age of 50 and displayed similar psychological and behavioral profiles. Their brains showed evidence of CTE, and 2 of the players, Long and Waters, committed suicide. Okay, but what about all the others? What about all the others that they had identified had these tau protein tangles who did not exhibit any psychological and behavioral changes? Because when you look at the evidence, you'll find there's more of those who did not exhibit signs or symptoms than there are of those who did exhibit the psychological and behavioral changes. But you see, those cases don't make headlines, and Sports Legacy Institute isn't going to tell you about it because their purpose and the way they profit is when they can sell the CTE theory. So again, there's gotta be another contributing factor here. There's a missing variable. In research, that's known as a lurking variable. One that people either aren't looking for or that people just aren't considering, but there's gotta be something else. So it says Mike Webster died of a heart attack but suffered from dementia, depression, and exhibited erratic behavior after retiring from football. When Justin Strzelczyk died at the age of 36, he had been telling relatives he was hearing voices from, quote, the evil ones, end quote, and then led police on a 40-mile high-speed chase through central New York at speeds up to 100 miles per hour on the wrong side of the highway, which resulted in an explosive crash and his death. But again, tragic as that may be, these horrific instances are the exception, not the rule. Otherwise, we'd be hearing stories like this all the time. Which reminds me, have there been many or any extreme cases of CTE violence, like in these given examples, since the Benoit case? When the SLI approached Michael Benoit about testing Chris's brain as part of the Sports Legacy Project, our goal was to determine if there was evidence of CTE caused by repeated trauma to the head sustained during Chris Benoit's career. We have now confirmed multiple concussions are part of his medical history, along with clinical symptoms associated with CTE, said Julian Bales, MD, professor and chairman of the Department of Neurosurgery at West Virginia University School of Medicine, and here we go again, and an SLI founding member. So how about getting the opinion of somebody who's not on the board of directors of this foundation? All of this just spits in the face of the scientific method. You need other qualified professionals to replicate the findings for validation purposes. Otherwise, it's nothing more than junk science. He goes on to say, because my SLI colleagues and I have found evidence of CTE in the brains of 4 former professional football players, we felt an examination of Chris Benoit's brain may bring awareness to CTE's existence outside of boxers and football players. I don't know. Or maybe you needed to look for these brain tangles in Benoit's brain so you can expand your reach and influence into other sports leagues, which will bring you more money and more notoriety. I don't know. This just is all weird. And when you learn more about this Sports Legacy Institute and how it was founded, holy cow, you want to talk about Looney Tunes. But that's another video. Subscribe and hit that bell so you get notified for upcoming videos. And while you're down there, don't forget you can find a link to my Cash App in the description box. If you like what you see and would like to support my channel, you can make a donation at the link below. Thank you very much. Then this says the findings of CTE in Benoit suggests that there may be a common syndrome among athletes who suffer multiple head injuries in contact sports. And that word right there, syndrome, that's a key word here. It's important to understand that when the word syndrome is used in diagnostic medicine, syndrome indicates that they're not exactly sure of what causes that particular disorder. That's the difference between something being called a disease, a disorder, or a syndrome. So having this saying here that the findings of CTE and Chris Benoit suggest there may be a common syndrome among athletes. That means that they have not yet identified exactly what causes the disease. A lot of time, these words are used interchangeably, but they do not mean the same thing. This is what I studied in school, so I can confidently explain the differences very simply. In diagnostic medicine, there's something that we refer to as SSDD, and I know commonly that's known as same shit, different day. However, in diagnostic medicine, that acronym stands for symptom, syndrome, disorder, and disease. Now, the symptom would be the signs that are the first things that are noticeable that could indicate a problem. So, symptoms, easily explainable. Then you have the syndrome. The syndrome is the collection of all the symptoms that are occurring comorbidly, which just means they're occurring at the same time. And it's absolutely not uncommon for any symptoms of the syndrome to eventually be found to have no relation to the disease or the disorder. This is where we search for correlations, but correlations only indicate that there's a relation between 2 or more variables. Correlation does not mean causation. It does not mean that the symptom is caused by the disease, okay? Then next you have the disorder. And it's the syndrome, remember the collection of symptoms, it's the syndrome that helps the attending physician determine the disorder. At this point, there's often no clear understanding which factors or which symptoms of the syndrome, remember a collection of symptoms, there's no clear understanding which symptoms in the syndrome can be linked directly to the disease. Because again, it's important to understand that at this point, we're only looking for correlation, which indicates a possible relationship. It does not mean cause and effect. This is the point in the research process or in the diagnostic process that studies or tests are done to determine which, if any of them, from the syndrome symptoms can be directly linked to the disease, which would be determinative causality. And after the direct cause of the disorder has been identified, then the disease can be diagnosed. And those are the steps that this process is conducted in, no matter what you're testing. These parameters are the standard. And usually if you're, if there's a new disease that you're studying and you're in the disorder phase where you're studying the syndrome, which is the collection of symptoms. You're studying the syndrome. You're looking at each symptom and studying it to see how it could cause or be linked to the disorder. Not all of the symptoms of the syndrome will end up being linked directly to the disease. So that's usually when you go through a stage in the research process called replication and validation. And right here is why it is so important, if not absolutely critical, that the research is shared among other institutions and other doctors so that the original findings can be analyzed to test to see if the results can be replicated. And the more often the results are replicated by independent researchers, the stronger that validation becomes. And conversely, if the independent researchers are not able to replicate the findings of the original research, then that essentially proves that the original hypothesis or the original findings cannot be replicated, therefore they are not valid. And then the next step after that is to go back to your hypothesis and modify your original ideas and test again. And then you need to keep going through this process, repeating the steps until definitive causation is reached. And it doesn't seem to me, from where I'm sitting, that this Sports Legacy Institute did any sort of replication or validation on their findings. And that is a big problem. They're keeping it all to these board members of the SLI. Sure, they work at different schools or different colleges of medicine, but they all have the common denominator of being on the board of directors of Sports Legacy Institute. So they all have the common interest of forwarding or promoting their cause. Right? Because if any other researchers would look at their findings and not be able to replicate the same results from the study, that could essentially mean these symptoms of CTE don't even explain anything, that there's no actual true causality between the symptoms and the disease. And that wouldn't be good for Sports Legacy Institute, would it? Because if there's no CTE, there's no Sports Legacy Institute. And that's the bottom line. So unfortunately for us little guys who are counting on these researchers to give us the best results, it's still just about ratings that would lead to profit. Like, think about movie previews and how they give the reviews of movies when they're showing the preview and they're like, 4 stars, says National Review or whatever. The best horror movie I've seen since Friday the 13th or whatever. I just pulled that out of my head. But of course they're going to pick the best, most flattering of the reviews. Do you think these movies only got positive reviews? Or were they able to pick through and toss out the ones that had the opinion of, well, I could skip it and just wait to watch it at home? No, they want you to believe that they're right because they're trying to sell you something. It makes no difference whether it's a product or an idea. It's really important to keep all of this in mind because my understanding as far as CTE, we're still in that disorder phase where we're looking at the symptoms, the syndrome, the collection of symptoms. And as it says right back here, it says right there, there's a common syndrome. So they're in that phase of research right now where they're looking at all of the symptoms and they're studying it to determine if the disorder leads to the disease. And that's science and that's medicine. So make of that what you will. There's just a little extra bit of information there to help you understand how this process works. So the most important takeaway from everything that I just said is that just because somebody has these tau protein tangles in their brains, there is no direct link or definitive causation to a disorder or disease called chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And in fact, until these studies are repeatedly replicated to ensure reliability and validity, it is quite possible that CTE, as defined by the Sports Legacy Institute, doesn't even exist in the first place. Hi, this is just a little extra part that I wanted to throw in at the end of this video because this video was meant to be uploaded yesterday. But I was doing some research and found this tweet by Nowinski that says, "No more playing games. Breakthrough analysis reveals repetitive head impacts are a definitive cause of CTE. Sports industry must acknowledge cause and effect and get to work protecting their athletes, especially children. Release, study, and a thread." And this tweet is dated July 26th, 2022. So coincidentally, as I was working on this video, Nowinski releases this study. So I decided to take some time and look at this and push the release of this video back a day so that I could include this at the end. Right here, this dude is basically repeating what I said, that correlations do not equal causation. And my argument was that this Sports Legacy Institute didn't actually have any proof of direct cause and effect. So here he's acknowledging that. So I decided to hold off on the upload to take a minute to read this study so I could end the video with some updated research. But it looks like for right now, it's only necessary to read as far as the research team conducting these supposedly breakthrough analyses that definitively prove head impacts cause CTE. Well, before I go there, I should add here that I will read more thoroughly through this study to make sure I understand it, because if I just toss it aside without any real consideration, then I'm no different from what I claim these researchers of being, a fraud who only seeks evidence which supports my claims. And if I am mistaken about my opinion, I will absolutely let all of you know that I was wrong. But skimming over it briefly, it's been a long time since I laughed so much over something, but this is the biggest freaking joke I've seen so far while researching this crime. The research team here, these names who did the study, every single one of them is on the board of directors of the Sports Legacy Institute. So this quote, breakthrough analysis proves only one thing, at least in my mind. These people are pushing so hard to prove something that may not even exist as a disorder. They are likely manipulating data, choosing which variables to test because they know people will believe that the quote, experts know better. But it's been 15 years since the founding of Sports Legacy Institute, and today they still have not proven cause and effect. Well, I have a video coming soon in which I will show you exactly how science can be essentially weaponized to forward a certain agenda. And the agenda is usually maximum profit with minimal regulatory oversight and accountability. And that's going to be a fun video, so stay tuned. Peace. And I'm so sorry, I really hate to do this. I know it's been a while since I uploaded a video, but I've been busy working on other things, doing a lot of recording to make sure that I get everything on the record, so to speak, that I want to, because I'm noticing that some articles I've had bookmarked have been disappearing. And I am still working on the other half of this that'll be out in a few days. If you like what you see here and you enjoy the research that I'm doing, your donation is what keeps this channel going. You can find a link to my Cash App in the description box below. Any donation of any amount is awesome. Even $1, even 50 cents, it'll add up. So I am monetized, but because YouTube doesn't exactly like the content that I'm providing you, I think the most that I've made in a day since I've been monetized was $1.85. And YouTube doesn't let you touch that money until it reaches $100. And I'm chugging along at under 20 as it is now. So this channel is almost completely viewer funded. Those of you who've been donating, I thank you so much. You've been helping me pay for the extra storage space that I need on the cloud to be able to keep these videos and all the documents and research. Thank you so much. But that's it for now. Make sure that you subscribe, share this with anyone you think might be interested, and hit that like button because I'm finding out that that really helps get more eyes on these videos. So thank you for watching. This has been AmKay at PSgizzle11, and I hope you have a great day. Bye!